The lesson that the Obama administration, many of those people now serving with President Biden, took away from it is that you don't negotiate on the debt ceiling. You make the argument that this is just paying the bills that you've already incurred, like anyone's credit card bill on a monthly basis. Republicans in the House particularly don't see it that way. Right. They see it as an opening to actually try and cut spending, as was done 12 years ago at this point. But I think you have an even more conservative group of House Republicans than back then.
Welcome to the Debrief, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the headlines they're covering and where the story's going next. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by magazine managing editor David Mark. David, we're in sort of a familiar place. We have a Democrat in the White House, Republicans controlling the House. There's a disagreement over spending. There's a deadline of some real consequence, and just a lot of ground to make up in order to arrive at some kind of deal. But we've been here before, haven't we?
Right. Going back to, depending how you define it, who was in power in 2011 when now President Joe Biden was vice president under Barack Obama. You had a Republican House and actually a Democratic Senate at this time. They had a big fight over the debt ceiling that never actually got fully resolved. Right. They kind of came up with the solution of, I think it was called a super committee of some sort. There's been so many of these, I can't even remember all the nomenclature over the years, where they agreed to future spending cuts, but they basically just tabled it. The lesson that the Obama administration, many of those people now serving with President Biden, took away from it is that you don't negotiate on the debt ceiling. You make the argument that this is just paying the bills that you've already incurred, like anyone's credit card bill on a monthly basis. Republicans in the House particularly don't see it that way. Right. They see it as an opening to actually try and cut spending, as was done 12 years ago at this point. But I think you have an even more conservative group of House Republicans than back then, and that was the Tea Party wave in Congress. Right. So things have just shifted even further apart.
Right, and what would have been the Tea Party wing now, you know, the successors to the Tea Party, they certainly have a lot more influence over leadership than they did, you know, during the Boehner and Ryan speakerships.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is just such a narrow House majority, 222 to 213 in House Republicans' favor. There's just not much wiggle room or grace there.
Mm-hmm. So each side, though, is sort of looking at it in a different way, not just in terms of what the right fiscal policy is, but they're also responding to different political incentives. And each side sort of thinks there's an advantage that they have.
Right. Republicans clearly feel like the public is on their side in terms of wanting to cut spending. The national debt is now at $31.4 trillion, which is just a magnitude higher than even the last time we went through this in 2011. And there's been a bunch of subsequent debt ceiling fights in the intervening 12 years. And the other thing about House Republicans, even if the general public is not with them, they come from such safe red districts in Kentucky or South Carolina, wherever it may be, just like Democrats come from blue districts. They don't really care. Their voters are egging them on and saying, yeah, go for it. And that's a real problem for the Democrats. One area where I think the Biden administration may have, in fact, certainly did miscalculate, was thinking that House Speaker Kevin McCarthy wouldn't even be able to get a bill passed in the House. They were kind of taunting him and egging him on, and sure enough, they pushed it through. It was by the barest majority, but it did happen. And it never was clear to me why they took that approach, because in this day and age, you've just got to assume that party leaders are going to be able to cajole their own members to get through a bill on the floor, just like Nancy Pelosi used to do on the Democratic side. So that was a strange one. The other thing is this no negotiation strategy by the Biden White House. That only works if you're prepared to go over the cliff, shoot the hostage, pick your metaphor.
Right.
If you're not willing to do that, then you've got a lot of problems. Now, maybe they are and really are willing to default. They're not going to say that out loud in advance, but that seems like the only way the strategy conceivably works. And even then, it's not clear how it finishes out.
So, I mean, they're clearly setting it up so that if there is a default, or even a near default that leads to anything like a downgrade of the U.S. credit rating, that it's the Republicans' fault. But anything that heightens the risk of recession, that's got to be a problem for Biden, who's running for re-election next year, no?
Yeah, absolutely. If the country's in any form of recession, and recession may be a generous term for what comes. We've never been through something like this.
Right.
But you're talking about stopping credit payments from going through. It's the Treasury Department says Social Security checks could, in theory, come to a halt, all kinds of other problems just with businesses being able to get loans and that sort of thing. Again, we don't know how much of this is hyperbole, how much is true, but just even considering a fraction of that is true, people are going to look at the president and say, hey, you're at fault. Now, maybe Biden has the political acumen and skills to be able to turn it on the Republicans and blame them, but that's an awfully big risk at this point.
Finally, the Texas Senate race. Texas is not considered to be one of the battleground states in terms of determining who controls the Senate. Republicans generally have a pretty favorable map, but Democrats have high hopes in this very red state. Why?
Right. This is about the only chance that Democrats have to pick up any kind of a Senate seat in the 2024 election cycle. They are already playing defense severely in states like Montana, Ohio, and West Virginia, and perhaps a couple of others as well. So they're latching onto whatever opportunities they have. Ted Cruz, Republican senator, is a divisive figure, to put it mildly. There's a lot of people who don't like him. He makes himself that way. He puts himself out there, and he knows exactly what he's doing. His likely Democratic opponent is Congressman Colin Allred. He represents basically the city of Dallas. Impressive character, actually. He's a former NFL linebacker who then got his law degree at Berkeley, became a civil rights lawyer, beat an incumbent Republican in 2018 to win his House seat, so he's got a lot of accomplishments. But it's still awfully tough to win statewide in Texas. The last one who came the closest was against Ted Cruz in 2018, then Congressman Beto O'Rourke, who ran kind of a haphazard campaign at the time. He was kind of just driving around on his own, maybe with an aide or two in the front seat. He was showing off his skateboarding skills. He was sometimes trying to play the dignified congressman, but other was like kind of a bro-ish figure. You got to think with a more professionally managed campaign, maybe Allred would come closer, and maybe the demographics have shifted more or even enough in 6 years to give him a chance, but still an uphill climb.
I mean, one thing that would be in Allred's disfavor, presumably, is that O'Rourke was running in a midterm election when there was no presidential candidates on the ballot, and he was running in a Democratic wave year nationally. This time, we don't know what the political wave would be. That actually could be something that goes either way, but they will be running at a time where a Republican presidential nominee, whoever that is, will be at the top of the ticket.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ted Cruz certainly knows that and will run accordingly with a Republican nominee, whether it's Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, or somebody else, whoever is nominated by Republicans. That is a serious problem for Mr. Allred. I suppose you could make the argument there could be reverse coattails. If he's a strong enough candidate, he could actually lift up the Democratic nominee, presumably President Joe Biden. And Texas is one of those states that Democrats talk about playing in every 4 years, but then they look at how expensive it would be, how much it would divert resources from actual swing states, and they say, no thanks. Maybe a super PAC throws in a bit of money there. But yeah, that's among his many challenges.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
You can read David and the rest of our political team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.